Caribbean and the people who live in these territories, because ultimately this is about what we are doing to benefit other people, particularly the people who need help the most. So I want to close by thanking UNDP and the Multi-Country Office. It would be remiss of me if I did not. It has been a pleasure working with Simon and Limia and the entire team at UNDP. Limia, you've been a rock star, really. Thank you so much for the support. I want to thank all of you who dared to come to Barbados. If this is your first time, I invite you to come again. The conference ends on Friday. I invite you to stay on for the weekend for as long as you can, to get an opportunity to see what Barbados has to offer, to see what the Caribbean has to offer. As I said before, I also hope we take this opportunity to exchange numbers, exchange emails, and become friends, because it is the bureaucracy in a lot of our systems that is preventing us from doing work. A lot of us with the political will to make things happen, challenged by the bureaucracy. So quiero darles oficialmente la bienvenida a todos a la hermosa isla de Barbados. Welcome to Barbados. May God bless all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirk. Thank you for setting the stage for what promises to be an engaging and solutions-oriented forum. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce my regional director, the regional director for UNDP in Latin America and the Caribbean, maybe I should say in the Caribbean and Latin America, Ms. Michelle Mouchette. Ms. Mouchette leads efforts to address development challenges in the region with a focus on active citizenship, governance, democracy, social protection, climate resilience, and reducing inequalities. As a former Minister of Social Development in the Panama, she brings extensive experience in public policy and development, adding a unique perspective into the region's challenges and opportunities. I now invite Michelle to the stage.
Thank you, Limia. Her Excellency, Honorable Mia Amour Moodley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Craig Humphrey, Minister of People, Empowerment and Elder Affairs, and the great champion behind this forum, Akim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, a privilege to have you with us here today, Querido José Manuel Salazar Sirinchas, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, and co-organizer of this forum alongside UNDP, Simon Springett, United Nations Resident Coordinator in Barbados, Limia El Tayeb, our resident representative for UNDP to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, members of Cabinet of Barbados, ministers from the region, delegates, development partners, colleagues, dear friends. I would like to start by reiterating our many times expressed gratitude to Barbados, represented here at its highest level in the figure of the Prime Minister and the members of the Cabinet for hosting this 16th Ministerial Forum for Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the first in person in the Caribbean. I would like to commend your leadership, Minister Humphrey, and the great collaboration with UNDP and ECLAC teams in making this possible, and all the hard work that is behind this. But as you mentioned yesterday, we enjoyed so much the process to the point that it didn't feel like work. I would like to extend my deepest appreciation to the 27 countries represented in this meeting, and a record number of Caribbean countries and ministers participating from this forum. This happening in times in which attained progress in Latin America and the Caribbean is under enormous pressure. In recent decades, Latin America and the Caribbean achieved great progress in terms of social development, democratic consolidation that are today at risk. Poverty, which once enveloped half of the population of our region, was reduced to the 25%, using the 6.8 line. Child mortality was cut in half, dropping from over 33 per 1,000 live births to 16 per 1,000 births. And the number of children out of school was significantly reduced from 1 in 4 to 1 in 10. And as people's lives improved, the country's economies grew, turning LAC into a middle-income region with all the caveats already mentioned by Minister Humphrey. During that same period, the region also underwent a process of democratic consolidation, becoming the third most democratic region in the world, after Europe and North America. Paul Sutton, which many of the Caribbean ministers may know, has argued at some points in his work that the Caribbean could be seen the most democratic region in the world, something to expand and discuss, but something that has been said. And with various specific exceptions, most changes in government in our region occur through free and fair elections and in peaceful and institutional context. From 2015 to the present, of the 35 elections that took place in the region, only 9 maintained the ruling coalition, reflecting an overall trend of transfer of power alternation in democratic context. Democracies in the region also made progress towards human rights, expanding participation and representation mechanisms, and strengthened institutions responsible for organizing electoral process, with the number of women in the political arena nearly tripled. But all this development in terms of human development, economic, and democratic gains start to stall, and in some cases regress, even before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, the Human Development Index for Latin America and the Caribbean remains below pre-pandemic levels. Jose Manuel and ECLAC has been insisting on the fact that we are already living on a second lost decade in terms of economic growth. And the impact of disruptive technologies, the increase in political polarization, the institutions' failure to meet and deliver on the citizens' demand are generating a democratic backslide in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in a world more interconnected than ever, and entering deeper into the era of the Anthropocene, new risks are emerging that are more intense, more compounded, more severe, affecting and impacting social, economic, political, and environmental dimensions of development, and putting enormous pressure on decision makers. So I would like to acknowledge and express my deepest appreciation for your presence here today in the middle of these challenging times, and to have prioritized this event on your busy and complex agendas, to spend some time on reimagining our future in Latin America and the Caribbean, and identifying what are those policies and transformations in terms of institutions and processes that we need to advance to get back on track to achieve a more sustainable and resilient development. And we need to interrogate ourselves why that spike in pressure in Latin America and the Caribbean. What are those pressure points that are generating these levels of tension in our region? What is driving this shift at this critical point of development in Latin America and the Caribbean? And we see, as part of these pressure points, the unresolved structural challenges of our region. High inequalities, vulnerability to poverty, low productivity, enormous levels of informality in our region that has been persistent despite all the progress achieved. Second, we see the levels of frustration for unresolved structural challenges combined with the uncertainty and insecurity that emerging risks are putting on our peoples, on our societies. And we see that in the region, protests increased over 30% since 2019, peaking at 25,000 protests in 2022, reflecting a collective crisis of expectations. We are the region in which polarization increased the most in the last 2 decades, and trust in institutions has decreased significantly, reaching levels close to only at 20%. Opening the door to other threats, such as organized crime and the emergence of populist leaderships in the region. So, in addition to that, and speaking about resilience from the Caribbean, we can leave out as an important pressure point the pressure caused by the rapidly changing climate. We saw this year how the hurricane season in the Caribbean started as early as never before, and we see in the region how the limiting access from water derived from droughts and increasingly wildfires impacting, in particular, much regions in South America is generating a lot of pressure. And finally, but this is not an exhaustive list of the pressure points, we have the rapid technological adoption that is transforming how people in our region communicate, work, engage with institutions, while technological advancements and digital technology can also offer new opportunities for participation and innovation. They also present significant challenges that threaten to exacerbate existing inequalities. Excelencias, no estamos aquí únicamente porque vivimos en tiempos de grandes desafíos en nuestra región, sino porque estamos convencidos que trabajando de la mano de los socios que tenemos en la sala el día de hoy, PNUD, ECLAC, con ustedes y de cara a sus prioridades, podemos ser capaces de identificar cuáles son esas válvulas de escape que necesitamos en nuestros sistemas hoy en día para canalizar esa presión y convertirla tal vez en una fuerza y en un motor que nos ayude a escribir un nuevo capítulo en la historia del desarrollo y de nuestras democracias en la región. Y esto amerita una revisión de las válvulas de escape existentes. Con esto me refiero a instituciones, políticas públicas, procesos, pero también pensar en qué otras tal vez necesitemos diseñar de cero en este momento para poder atender a los desafíos que experimentamos hoy. Y en recalibrar las existentes está parte de los temas que discutiremos en estos 2 días. Sistemas de protección social universales han sido ya un consenso por parte de los países de la región. Sin embargo, necesitamos analizar con mayor detalle cómo los sistemas de protección social pueden ser capaces de tener en cuenta la matriz de riesgo en evolución en nuestra región. Cuando hablamos de nuevas válvulas de escape, son aquellas que nos permitan navegar las transformaciones y transiciones que están en curso en el mundo y que van a continuar avanzando. Y depende de nosotros como región el lograr los mecanismos, las instituciones, los procesos y las políticas públicas que nos permitan convertir esas transiciones en una oportunidad para el desarrollo. Y usemos como ejemplo la transición digital, la inteligencia artificial y las nuevas tecnologías y la importancia de poder diseñar mecanismos y procesos que garanticen que sean fuerzas para abonar a la inclusión, a la participación, a la productividad, en lugar de solo amenazas. Y hay medios para lograr este recalibraje de nuestras válvulas de escape. El primero, seguramente, el diálogo, como medio fundamental para reconstruir confianza en un momento donde la confianza es escasa, en las relaciones interpersonales, en el funcionamiento de nuestras instituciones y de los gobiernos. Y la democracia es, en esencia, eso, una conversación entre personas, entre las personas y sus representantes, entre ciudadanos, entre instituciones, que no necesariamente vamos a estar de acuerdo, pero somos capaces de lograr un mínimo de consensos de cara a esa visión compartida de desarrollo que queremos avanzar en nuestros países y en nuestra región. Lo que se hace fundamental en un momento en el que el mundo y la región es más interdependiente que nunca antes. Y cuando vemos los desafíos que nos afectan en este momento, su inmensa mayoría trasciende fronteras. Cuando pensamos en cambio climático, cuando pensamos en crimen organizado, pero también cuando pensamos en infraestructura digital, en comercio, en cadenas de valor, necesitamos respuestas que vayan más allá de las respuestas internas a los niveles de los países. Y este ejercicio va a servir también para el PNUD poder informar su próximo informe regional sobre desarrollo humano, cuyo tema central es el mismo tema de la conferencia que hoy nos convoca. Es cómo somos capaces de construir mecanismos que nos permitan avanzar un desarrollo humano que sea resiliente ante los shocks emergentes que estamos experimentando en la región. Y de cierta manera, estos niveles de presión que estamos experimentando pueden ser vistos también como un privilegio, como el privilegio de un resultado de años de progreso, de décadas de progreso. Que nuestras democracias estén bajo presión en este momento parte de la premisa de que vivimos en una región con vocación democrática. y realmente eso es un privilegio cuando lo comparamos con fenómenos que están sucediendo en otras partes de nuestro mundo. Y estamos aquí también porque entendemos que estas acciones requieren del mayor sentido de urgencia y de rescatar esa capacidad innovadora que tuvo la región en décadas anteriores de estar al frente del desarrollo de las políticas sociales con programas que luego han sido replicados en otras partes del mundo. Esa misma capacidad de innovar la tenemos hoy y debemos ponerla al servicio de los desafíos que estamos enfrentando, que no son los mismos del pasado. Es muy claro que más de lo mismo no va a funcionar y por eso este encuentro se hace tan importante. Este foro, y quiero invitarlos a que lo veamos como una oportunidad para conectar, para construir relaciones, como decía el ministro Humphrey, que nos permitan ser mucho más fuertes en nuestros procesos y sentirnos acompañados en el camino de buscar soluciones a los desafíos de nuestra región, pero también un espacio para reimaginar ese futuro inmediato del desarrollo en América Latina y el Caribe. De alguna manera, el futuro del desarrollo de nuestra región está en las manos de nosotros, de esta generación, y en buena parte de quienes se encuentran en esta sala, como les compartía en el y para eso cuentan con todas las capacidades
and we rely on the capacities of all of you, UNDP's decades of experience,
en avanzar un desarrollo humano que sea sostenible y fortalecer la institucionalidad democrática, con una presencia universal, pero también en cada uno de sus países, con una red
global network of experience in terms of development, which is at your disposal, and with the capacity to generate the solutions and develop according to your priorities, national priorities. This space is an opportunity for us to learn from you.
Nuestras instituciones, trabajando de la mano con nuestros socios, estén a la altura de los desafíos de hoy y que puedan acompañarlos a ustedes de una mejor manera. Yo concluyo con esperanza. La esperanza que me da verlos a ustedes reunidos hoy en el marco de este foro. La esperanza que me da la enorme riqueza que tiene nuestra región, la más biodiversa del planeta, con una riqueza multicultural extraordinaria, y una pequeña muestra de eso la tuvimos antes de iniciar este foro, con una extraordinaria capacidad de innovar. Y estoy convencida que es posible abrir paso para un mejor desarrollo que sea más resiliente y más inclusivo en la región. Su presencia hoy es la mejor garantía para tener este sentido de esperanza. Quiero agradecerles por su confianza y no puedo concluir sin expresar mi más profunda gratitud por todos los equipos que estuvieron involucrados en hacer este encuentro, este importante encuentro, hoy posible. Estoy segura que vamos a hacer de esto un éxito y que a partir de aquí podemos redoblar nuestros esfuerzos para construir un desarrollo resiliente en nuestra región. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Michelle, for these insightful thoughts and provocative thoughts as well. Just reflecting on what has been said by the two previous speakers, we realize that more than ever, garnering and coalescing partnerships is imperative. None of us can do this work alone, and this forum is an example. The collaboration between UNDP and ECLAC to provide this space and maintain this space for policy dialogue showcases what can happen when we all work collectively and cross the bridges, as Minister Humphrey said. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Jose Manuel Salazar Chirinax, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, with a distinguished career spanning academia, public policy, and international organizations. Mr. Salazar served as senior positions in ILO and the World Trade Organization. His work focuses on promoting economic development, inclusive growth, and resilient social protection systems. Please welcome Mr. Salazar.
Good morning, Her Excellency Ms. Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, dear Mr. Kirk Humphrey, Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs of Barbados, dear Michelle Mouchette, Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations Development Program. Dear Achim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Development Program. Dear Simon Springett, President Coordinator of the United Nations in Barbados. Honorable ministers from Latin America and the Caribbean, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. For ECLAC, it is a great pleasure and honor to be celebrating together with our partners at UNDP one more edition of this important ministerial forum for development in Latin America and the Caribbean. As you know, since 2014, ECLAC and UNDP have joined forces to jointly convene year after year the governments of the region to organize this forum in coordination with the program of work of the Regional Conference for Social Development of Latin America and the Caribbean. That is why this afternoon we will also have the sixth meeting of the presiding officers of the Regional Conference for Social Development. Excelencias, en esta ocasión tan importante, nuestra conversación ocurre en un contexto global y regional de alta complejidad e incertidumbre, rivalidades geopolíticas, conflictos armados que ponen en entredicho la paz mundial, tendencias tecnológicas, demográficas, migratorias y climáticas disruptivas y una globalización en proceso de reconfiguración. Los impactos del cambio climático son especialmente fuertes aquí en el Caribe, con daños anuales en varios países que suman varios puntos del Producto Interno Bruto, por lo que el tema de la resiliencia ante la vulnerabilidad es un tema absolutamente central en esta región, como también discutimos ampliamente en la reunión de Trinidad y Tobago de la Caribbean Development Cooperation Committee. Las tasas de crecimiento del comercio internacional y la inversión extranjera directa a nivel mundial registran una desaceleración significativa desde la crisis financiera del 2008 y 2009. Y la rivalidad geopolítica y tecnológica ha llevado a que la seguridad, más que la eficiencia, se haya convertido en el objetivo prioritario en la administración de la interdependencia global. Hoy día, los países hablan y priorizan la seguridad energética, la seguridad alimentaria, la seguridad en cadenas de suministro, etc. Hemos pasado de celebrar la interdependencia a desconfiar de la interdependencia y a buscar estrategias de de-risking. Desde la CEPAL vemos a una región inmersa en una crisis de desarrollo caracterizada por tres trampas, una de baja capacidad para crecer, otra de alta desigualdad, baja movilidad social y débil cohesión social, y una tercera de capacidades institucionales débiles y gobernanza poco efectiva. Los datos sobre la primera trampa son elocuentes. Entre el 2015 y el 24, el Producto Interno Bruto de la región ha crecido a solo 0.9% en promedio por año. Esto es menos que el 2% al que la región creció en la famosa década perdida de los 80s. Y por lo tanto, el Producto Interno Bruto per cápita promedio de la región en el mismo periodo ha crecido a solo 0.1%, es decir, prácticamente no ha crecido. La trampa de baja capacidad para crecer es muy preocupante, porque son con tasas de crecimiento de entre el 1 y el 2%, no en años excepcionales, sino como promedio de una década, es muy difícil reducir pobreza e informalidad, crear empleos de calidad y generar ingresos fiscales para financiar necesidades de inversión pública y de gasto social. Durante nuestro reciente 40º periodo de sesiones a principios del mes de octubre, presentamos el documento titulado América Latina y el Caribe ante las trampas del desarrollo, transformaciones indispensables y cómo gestionarlas, en el que analizamos las tres trampas e identificamos 11 grandes transformaciones en los modelos de desarrollo de la región para salir de las trampas y cerrar las brechas. Estamos insistiendo también no solo en los qué hacer, sino en los cómo hacerlo. Y esta pregunta sobre los cómo la aterrizamos en 4 temas. El tema de la gobernanza de las políticas, el tema de las capacidades top, técnicas, operativas, políticas y prospectivas de las instituciones, los espacios de diálogo social para involucrar a todos los actores relevantes y la economía política de las transformaciones. De esta forma, para salir de la trampa de baja capacidad para crecer, estamos insistiendo en la gran importancia de las políticas de desarrollo productivo, que entre otras cosas apuesten a un portafolio de sectores impulsores o dinamizadores, tales como sectores industriales, servicios modernos habilitados por el Internet, la sociedad del cuidado, los sectores del gran impulso hacia la sostenibilidad, como las energías renovables, la electromovilidad, la agricultura sostenible, el turismo sostenible, por supuesto, y otros. Además, estamos recomendando metodologías de gobernanza tales como las iniciativas clúster y otras, temas todos que hemos analizado en detalle en nuestro reciente nuevo reporte emblemático titulado Panorama de las políticas de desarrollo productivo en América Latina y el Caribe. En cuanto a la trampa de alta desigualdad y baja movilidad social y baja cohesión social, que está en el centro de los temas que ocupan a este foro, la vemos como un fenómeno multidimensional, tanto en relación a los factores que la generan y reproducen, como en sus manifestaciones, abarcando no solo los ingresos. Está relacionada también con bajos niveles de movilidad y cohesión social. Y lamentablemente lleva a situaciones de creciente malestar social y elevados niveles de desconfianza interpersonal e institucional. Vemos a esta trampa arraigada en 7 factores que actúan como causas fundamentales. Primero, la alta desigualdad está arraigada en lo productivo, con economías con baja capacidad para crecer y alta heterogeneidad productiva que se asocia con un mercado de trabajo poco dinámico, con alta informalidad y grandes diferencias de productividad entre sectores, entre tamaños de empresa y entre regiones o subregiones dentro de un país. De aquí la importancia de las políticas de desarrollo productivo en la reducción de la desigualdad y la promoción de la movilidad social. Segundo, la desigualdad está también asociada con sistemas tributarios regresivos, sesgados hacia los impuestos indirectos que limitan significativamente el potencial poder redistributivo de los sistemas tributarios. Tercero, los sistemas de protección social son un ámbito fundamental para reducir la desigualdad, aumentar la movilidad social, la cohesión social y la resiliencia. Los sistemas de pensiones, contributivos y no contributivos, los sistemas de salud, las políticas activas de mercado de trabajo, son solo algunos de los ámbitos de la política social que son claves para reducir desigualdad. Por lo tanto, es esencial fortalecer las políticas sociales y de protección social y la correspondiente institucionalidad. En cuarto lugar, está el papel clave de la educación y la formación profesional. Para que la educación pueda desarrollar su potencial como vía de movilidad social y desarrollo productivo se precisan no solo altas tasas de escolaridad, sino una mejora en la calidad del aprendizaje. Y esta es un área en que siguen existiendo grandes deficiencias en los sistemas educativos de la región. Para que la educación sea un verdadero promotor de la movilidad social ascendente y de reducción de desigualdad, los ministerios de educación enfrentan el reto de fortalecer sus capacidades técnicas, operativas, políticas y prospectivas. Quinto, una causa fundamental de la desigualdad es la desigualdad de género. La propuesta que se ha desarrollado para combatir la desigualdad de género es la sociedad del cuidado, una propuesta transformadora, esencial para reducir la desigualdad y promover la inclusión social. En sexto lugar, las ciudades. Las ciudades latinoamericanas y caribeñas tienden a ser fábricas de desigualdades, con altos niveles de ocupación informal del suelo y edificación al margen de las regulaciones estatales, segregación espacial, con altos costos de transporte para los sectores pobres, hacinamiento habitacional y otras privaciones de acceso a servicios de agua, de saneamiento y de electricidad. Todo lo anterior lleva a importantes niveles de exclusión social. De esta forma, avanzar hacia ciudades inclusivas es parte también fundamental de la agenda para reducir las desigualdades y mejorar la cohesión social en la región. Y por último, en este listado, no incluye todo, pero recoge una parte importante de los factores que alimentan la desigualdad. Está el tema de la discriminación y las violaciones de los derechos humanos que sufren ciertos grupos de población, como los indígenas, los afrodescendientes y otros. Trabajar e incidir únicamente en una o dos de estas causas fundamentales de la alta desigualdad, la baja movilidad social y la débil cohesión social no será suficiente para salir de la trampa. Es necesario un enfoque integrado que incida simultáneamente sobre todas ellas. Y esta es tal vez una de las razones por las que la desigualdad ha sido una de las características más conocidas desde hace décadas, pero también que más se resiste a ser transformada en los países de la región, por supuesto, junto con los intereses y equilibrios de poder que se oponen a la mejora en algunos de estos aspectos. A las trampas de bajo crecimiento y elevada desigualdad se suma la de débiles capacidades institucionales y gobernanza poco efectiva, que complican la definición, implementación y articulación de acciones transformadoras que cuenten con una amplia legitimidad social y política. Estos temas están muy relacionados con las prioridades recién abordadas en la Cumbre del Futuro de las Naciones Unidas que tuvo lugar hace algunas semanas en Nueva York. En efecto, las acciones priorizadas en la Declaración sobre las generaciones futuras, por ejemplo, allí los países acordaron como parte de la Acción 6 invertir en las personas para acabar con la pobreza y reforzar la confianza y la cohesión social. El llamado de la CEPAL es a crear un nuevo consenso regional en torno a los desafíos del desarrollo y cómo enfrentarlos. Para ello, en cada país se requieren visiones y estrategias de mediano y largo plazo con la participación genuina de todos los actores de la sociedad y un Estado e instituciones competentes con capacidades para orientar, convocar y ofrecer servicios de calidad. Ante ese desafío, la temática principal de este foro, la idea de una resiliencia en acción, con políticas sociales para navegar la incertidumbre, nos da una gran oportunidad para discutir a fondo el reforzamiento de las capacidades institucionales en el área social, así como el aporte transformador de las políticas sociales para simultáneamente generar y cerrar brechas de bienestar, contribuir a la capacidad de respuesta social e institucional, a una estructura de riesgos en rápida reconfiguración. En la cuarta reunión de la Conferencia Regional sobre Desarrollo Social en el 2021, esta temática también fue el centro de las deliberaciones y ahí también se desarrolló un foco en la realidad del Caribe bajo el generoso auspicio de Antigua y Barbuda. En aquel momento subrayamos la importancia de articular las políticas de protección social con las de gestión de riesgos, de desastre, con foco en la prevención y desarrollar y fortalecer una doble resiliencia a nivel de las personas y a nivel de las instituciones, en especial en el caso de la protección social, para que ésta sea universal, integral, sostenible y resiliente. A pocas semanas luego de la Cumbre y Declaración del Futuro, debemos relevar la importancia de adoptar una perspectiva de futuro con foco en las próximas generaciones. Esta mirada también debe hacerse cargo de los desafíos pendientes después de casi 30 años transcurridos desde la Conferencia de Copenhague y rumbo a la segunda Cumbre Mundial sobre Desarrollo Social. No en vano, la Declaración del Futuro llama explícitamente a que los resultados de la segunda Cumbre Mundial sobre Desarrollo Social que se celebrará en 2025 sean ambiciosos. En la CEPAL queremos responder a este llamado y por ello la sexta reunión de mesa directiva de nuestra Conferencia de Desarrollo Social para América Latina y el Caribe, que se va a realizar esta tarde, invitará a los países a identificar prioridades, desafíos y mensajes para que la voz de nuestra región ocupe un lugar que la represente en las discusiones que ya se iniciaron de camino hacia la Cumbre Social Mundial del año entrante. Esperamos que las discusiones que sostendremos en estos días sean un eslabón importante en ese proceso. Esperamos también avanzar hacia la segunda Cumbre Mundial fortaleciendo las capacidades y la eficiencia de las políticas públicas y en la definición de una agenda para el desarrollo social inclusivo con compromisos relevantes para nuestra región y que contribuyan a movilizar las voluntades de nuestros países. Y en ese sentido, esta reunión y con el gran liderazgo de Barbados y la primera ministra Mia Mottley, estamos en buenas manos y es un paso hacia adelante. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Salazar. Thank you for the interconnectivity and your valuable reflections. I now have the honor of introducing the Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, Mr. Akim Steiner, who will draw on his extensive experience and offer a global perspective. Mr. Steiner has been the administrator of UNDP since 2017 and has decades of leadership experience in international organizations, including serving as the executive director of UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. He is a global advocate for innovation and sustainable development, for the SDGs, for climate action, for poverty eradication. His leadership at UNDP focused on supporting countries in addressing these global challenges, including financing for development. Please welcome the UNDP Administrator, Akim Steiner.
Right, Honorable Prime Minister Mia Amor-Motley, Honorable Minister Humphrey, my dear colleagues Jose Manuel, Michelle, Simon, and Lamia on the podium, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and delegates and participants to the 16th Ministerial Forum for Development in Latin America and the Caribbean with a capital C, as you just pointed out. May I begin, Prime Minister, by just saying what an honor and a pleasure it is to be in your country, amongst your people, but also with you who just came back last night and joined us immediately at this forum here, having just spent the last few days looking at the world from the vantage point of a Caribbean island nation, but also, as you have become over the years, a global advocate to looking at the future of development differently, with clearer eyes and clearer recognition of where we are perhaps failing to understand that things really have to be reconstructed, as you have often called for. My joining you here at this forum is also a tribute to, I think, the wonderful work that our colleagues Michelle and Jose Manuel are doing together. In our United Nations family, we have many different entities, many different fora, and in fact, we are very proud that not only one, but in fact two major international meetings are happening this year, hosted by Caribbean nations, Antigua and Barbuda, just a few months ago with the SID Summit, and now we are here with the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean, focusing on some of the fundamental questions that are at the forefront of your minds as ministers, as governments, but let us also be clear, at the forefront of your citizens. And I love the title that you have, Minister, People Empowerment and Elders Affairs. I'm just called administrator. I wish I could invoke the kind of aspiration and ambition that is embodied also in the title of a ministerial portfolio. I also stand here before you as somebody who deeply believes in multilateralism. And as I shared with ministers at our breakfast this morning, being a not only convinced multilateralist, but also a leader within the United Nations system at this moment in time, sometimes makes not for easy getting up in the mornings. These are tough times. But actually, they're also extremely important times. And I'm very proud and very humbled to be here with you, because amongst you are many of the leaders in your countries who are facing precisely the kinds of challenges, contradictions, setbacks, frustrations that are driving the political arena in each of your countries and indeed across the world at the moment. This is an era that is an era of disruption. We are seeing a world that is returning to conflict and competition and wars, with more people displaced, more refugees, more suffering than we have seen for decades. We are not at a glorious moment of sustainable development advancements. And therefore, yes, this is a moment where reflecting on what is going wrong and also where are the pathways for moving forward within each one of our countries, nations, communities, but also as a global family of nations. And again, Prime Minister, I want to thank you, because Barbados is a small country, but it has brought a global voice to understanding how it is that the fate of one nation in the 21st century is not only a function of the decisions taken within its own borders, but is in so many ways also dependent, a product, but also an architect of a global response to so many of these challenges that we now face. I want to just dwell for a couple of moments on the theme and the term resilience that has been at the center of the discussions leading up also to the Bridgetown declaration that will come out of this meeting. I asked my colleagues, Jose Manuel and Michel, this morning, does resilience as it has emerged in the English language translate in the same way into Spanish, for example, resiliencia? Well, in some ways it does, but it is actually an interesting phenomenon how in our world of development speak, as we sometimes call it, new terms arrive. And I think it is not a coincidence that the term resilience has become such a prominent term, in part to confront the many challenges we face. It's not a new theory of development, but it is highlighting the fact that, first of all, we live in an extraordinary, vulnerable time when it comes to environmental change and climate change. Nowhere else than here in the Caribbean, or indeed across Latin America, do I need to remind us of this. As we speak today, Spanish people and citizens are waking up to a catastrophic flood event. In Brazil, for the first time, lakes are running dry because of a drought that has not been seen in decades. And I could go on, because you can switch on television almost every day now and see how the scenarios that 20 years ago the scientists were beginning to give us as actors and as politicians and as decision makers have moved from scenarios to realities playing out before our very eyes. But resilience, even though its origins come perhaps out of that more natural science and environmental science-oriented world, in fact, increasingly, I think, also applies to the economic and social. Both Jose Manuel and Michel have spoken about it. Many of you are at the forefront of addressing some of the deepest tensions and also contradictions, perhaps, in terms of development impacts. Inequality, the perception of citizens that they're increasingly not aligned with where government is meant to serve them or function. How an economy that is sometimes measured in GDP growth may sound very healthy, but in terms of the lived reality of citizens, is for most people somewhere completely different. Resilience is also about understanding that we do need to confront more clearly and more deliberately not only the shocks, be they environmental, and again, island nations have been examples where a third of your GDP can be wiped out in a matter of 12 to 24 hours. But also to look at resilience as something that actually prepares us better for many of the sometimes difficult choices that lie ahead. We do live in an age of disruption, the pandemic having been a magnifying glass to many of the vulnerabilities in our societies. And they extend from inequality, as we saw in the ability to either continue education or not during the pandemic, right through to the ability to go and borrow money in order to stabilize your economy and protect small and medium-scale enterprises in terms of their ability to survive the pandemic and the shutdowns that we saw. But it was also a moment in which we realized that good governance, functioning institutions, the ability of the government to step in at a moment when an economy implodes is also part of resilience. The term may seem strange to some, but I think it is actually a very good looking glass through which to examine right now how do we move forward. Much of UNDP's work today across the world is, as Michel already alluded to, very much focused on the future of development. None of your countries need us in the United Nations system, from wherever aspect or angle or specialized agency we may come from, to tell you what your problems are. We live in a world where your citizens are the first ones to be able to articulate the challenges, but also increasingly the solutions. The question is, are we able together, as UNDP and many of your countries with whom we have been partners for decades, we have walked alongside of you for decades learning about how development needs to evolve, are we able to look to the future of development and then work backwards into the present in order to also seize the opportunities? The irony, perhaps, of this moment in history in which we live right now, very diverse depending on who you are and where you live on this planet, is ironically both an era of disruption and setbacks and also perhaps a most unprecedented era of opportunity. I would even go as far as saying we live in an age of possibility and we are not seizing them. And what is at the heart of these failures to seize these opportunities? Sometimes it is misguided policies, sometimes it is polarized societies, radicalization, disengagement, confrontation, are present in so many of our countries across the globe today. They paralyze government, they also disturb economies, and ultimately, they don't solve problems, they simply entrench problems. Part of our role as UNDP in a world of development possibilities is to be a partner, not with the answers of what it is that you need to do, but rather as a great connector to all those who are constantly working on the same challenges, whether it's social safety nets, economic stimulus packages, addressing inequality, but also seizing and investing in the opportunities that technology and science is offering us. Much of our work across the world has traditionally been focused on governance and economic development. We continue to be an institution that is a wanted and often, I think, appreciated partner in this. But we are also increasingly focusing on how do we move forward? How does a country that is not maybe a home to many of the financial institutions and therefore the capital markets, nevertheless shape its own destiny by being smarter about how it is able to leverage the possibilities of this moment? Again, Prime Minister, I want to pay a tribute to you because you have taken on a battle that many would have said, wow, where does the courage come from? Reforming the international financial architecture. I mean, it is not exactly the subject that you would have woken up in your younger years and declared the top of the agenda, and yet you arrived precisely at the conclusion that unless we tackle our international financial system and begin to address some of its irrationalities, namely that we are in an age where there is more money than ever before in human history in our financial systems. In fact, our money, your savings, your pensions. It is a strange phenomenon that we somehow have ended up in a situation where our financial institutions have, in a sense, become the owners of the very wealth that belongs to each one of our citizens. We are transacting in a third degree of abstraction that allows a world to be full of funds and those who are holding them saying we can't invest them, and yet the world that urgently needs finance in order to solve problems that are existential, not only to their own citizens, but actually to the future of humanity, are not able to access finance. To be working in UNDP at this moment in time is not only to be a strong partner to each of your countries, it is also to connect the dots, both in terms of the frontiers of innovation, but also in terms of tackling some of the contradictions in our international system. We are in the 21st century bound by destiny and possibility to realize that we have to work together as an international community. Sustainable development in our era is premised and essentially prejudiced if actions are not taken, often by those who are outside our national jurisdictions. Being able to put a spotlight on this, to understand that, for instance, the advent of new technologies, as we just saw at the Summit of the Future of the United Nations and the new Digital Global Compact, is as much about how the international community sets boundaries, but also ensures that this is not a technology that will privilege a few and leave most of the world behind. It is also about trying to understand how digital public infrastructure is a core responsibility of every state and government. This is one of the lessons of development that we in UNDP are currently learning with many of you to embrace and to quickly find a way in which to ensure that particularly least developed countries, smaller economies, are not left behind in what is a transformative moment, again, in the history of humanity and development. Digital and the advent of artificial intelligence will change everything in the way we think we can do things, or in the way it may leave so many behind and therefore decoupled from a global economy that is advancing at a very different pace. I end, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, by thanking you once again for finding a moment in your very busy lives to come together for this 16th Ministerial Forum. As both Michel and also Jose Manuel and Minister Humphrey said, this is not a negotiating forum. Amongst you, there are many different governments, policies, development pathways. But to have Latin America and the Caribbean hosted in the Caribbean, exchange, and also to think forward together, because whether you are a national government, a regional community, or part of a global family, we live in an age where much of what will happen in one country does require us to find common ground and shared interests on which to build those pathways out of crisis. Our responsibility as this generation at this moment in time, however harsh the headwinds may be, is in fact not to lose sight of the fact that we do live in an age of possibility, and the choices that we make will in fact determine so many opportunities that those who follow us, be they our children, our grandchildren, will actually benefit from. In that spirit, it is my privilege to join you here and over the next 2 days to listen to you and to carry with me, together with our teams in the UN family, the insights, but also the courageous directions that are emerging from within your region. And there are so many examples I could speak to right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Achim. Thank you, Administrator, for the insights into the global conversation that we are in the middle of. And thank you for outlining how we can collectively move forward. It is now my distinct privilege and honor to introduce the Honorable Mia Amor Motley. I love the Amor and the love that she shares, not only with her continent, the sub-region and the region, but with the world. The Prime Minister of Barbados, with a prominent political career spanning over 30 years, since first taking office as Prime Minister in 2018. The Honorable Mia Motley has distinguished herself on the global stage as a strident advocate for vulnerable and developing states, particularly on climate justice, on inequalities, on fighting poverty, on access to finance, and on restructuring the international financial institutions and architecture. Among her many accolades is the UN Champion of the Earth Award, which she received in 2021 for her policy leadership. We are truly honored and privileged that you are here with us today, because I know that you've been traveling long and far, and I also know that you just came back. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming the Prime Minister of Barbados to deliver her feature address.
Thank you very much, Limia. To our distinguished guests on the platform, what do I say? Manuel, it is my honor to thank you publicly for you and your institution's responsiveness immediately after Hurricane Beryl to help us in the very difficult task of damage assessment and loss assessment. And when I spoke to you, you were traveling to New York, and you immediately arranged for the dispatching of a team here to be able to help us. And I want to thank you publicly for being as responsive as you were to the government and people of Barbados. And forgive me if I also single out Akim. I am so happy that you can join us today. I am aware that you are in your closing innings and will soon be departing UNDP in a few months. But it is a signal honor for us to receive you here today. UNDP, perhaps more than any other UN agency, has been that entity that has been in direct connection with the well-being and the ordinary people of this region, not only my country, but in particular from this office in Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean as well. And I'm sure that I can speak on behalf of my other brothers and sisters in CARICOM who have continued to be very grateful for the role that UNDP has played in helping us on this journey. And why? And I thank both Michelle and Simon, who are also here with us. But I ask us to reflect on why. We became independent countries in the Caribbean very recently. In the 1960s, 1962, with Jamaica and Trinidad leading the way, 1966, Guyana and Barbados, and we can come right back down through the Eastern Caribbean and Belize as we went through the process. And on becoming independent countries, we did so with a clear understanding that ours now was a responsibility to see people, hear people, and feel people, and to bring development to people who, for the most part, were seen as beasts of burden, and whose existence was only appreciated, regrettably, as a factor of production. We have, over the course of the last 60 years as a region, and less time depending on which point we've determined that we would become masters of our own fate, we recognize that the journey would be a complex journey and would require many decades, really, to reverse centuries of underdevelopment and centuries of culture that did not allow either our institutions or our cultural approaches to come to the point where it wanted to relieve poverty, it wanted to see healthy populations, it wanted to create opportunities. That became our responsibility. But the depths from which we were coming and the failure to have institutions that were appropriate to be able to develop our country has been the challenge that we have tried to manage over the course of the last 6 decades. The reality is that this report, produced by ECLAC on development traps in Latin America and the Caribbean, which has only just come out, captures it well with respect to the recognition that the development trap is linked to our low growth, low capacity for growth, high inequality and low social cohesion and mobility, and low institutional capacity and ineffective governance. We've been fighting this battle for the better part of 6 decades, and we've done reasonably well. Let us be very clear. We have lifted large numbers of our population out of poverty. But the fact that we still have an underbelly of poverty is what must drive us even further and harder than at any other time, because we have this underbelly of poverty at a time when the global environment is threatening to reduce back into poverty many countries that thought that they had turned the corner. And you would notice that I am in conversation mode, not speech mode. And I'm in conversation mode because it is important that we reflect on the fact that at the same time that we want to solve this problem of this underbelly of poverty, we are confronted with crises that can topple the state at any time. Whether that crisis is climate and the corresponding consequences arising from lack of appropriate measures to protect our biodiversity, as our colleagues in Colombia are meeting as we speak here, whether that threat comes from the pandemic, which if I had spoken about that a decade ago, you would have let it run off your back like water off of a duck's back. But the experience of almost 3 years of restricted movement and all that it brought with it, and the consequential post-traumatic stress disorder that is still lingering among members of our populations across the world, cause us to know that pandemics now are not to be ignored, and rather than being ignored, that they have the capacity to destabilize nations and to send people back into poverty, not to mention the lives that it will take. We have equally to fight this battle against all who believe that those who have should have more, and those who do not have should not get. And that is a simple way of describing, regrettably, the last 5 decades in particular of how the world has approached the issue of fairness and equity in wealth creation and in poverty eradication. The inequity that was allowed to cement itself across the developed world in particular, but equally the developing world. And you may say that we were accustomed to that because that was the modality for operation and colonization, so that was nothing new for us. But that inequity has bred a level of distrust at worst and apathy at best, at the very time when the world needs to be able to have its population globally helping in the fight against these crises that can all destabilize us. And if we thought we had difficulties with access to development funding, it has become worse because at the very time that we need development funding for people, we equally need funding for adaptation and resilient building because the environment within which we are living is now equally a threat to our people's capacity to survive. This can be daunting, but it need not remove from us the option of being optimistic on our capacity to become resilient. We're in a parish where, for us, our first national hero comes as a result of a failed revolution in this parish. And that attempt to claim freedom was also married to a resilient character. Because while those who led the revolution, Bussa and Nanny Gregg and all the rest, may have failed in the revolution and regrettably lost their lives, those who remained had to develop a level of resilience just to be able to survive, particularly given the antagonistic atmosphere and environment within which they were then forced to live. Now, I cannot imagine any of us in here, in this country, in this region, in this hemisphere, facing those challenges and being able to survive in the manner in which they did, such that even though the journey was long and hard, they were able to make a defining difference in allowing us to reach a completely different set of circumstances for the great-grandchildren and the great-great-grandchildren of those people. I refer to that simply to give us comfort and confidence that no matter how daunting these challenges seem, I believe that we are equal to the task. And I believe that our ability to recognize where the difficulties are will help us solve them. The Bridgetown Initiative speaks first and foremost to the need for the reform of international financial institutions, not because we have nothing else to do, but because they have not worked in the interests of lifting our countries fully out of difficult circumstances that have denied development for all of our people. And as I said, if you combine that now with the new crises that have emerged, the need for financing becomes even all the more critical. And as we say all the time, it is a false dichotomy to ask me to choose between people and planet with respect to the development policies that we must pursue. As I've said to our people during COVID, we are not a one-issue people. We're not a one-issue people. And we may rise and solve the problems of developing critical infrastructure and becoming more resilient, and then end up dying from crime or from a pandemic. We have to be able to manage the multiplicity of challenges, or as we would say in simple language, we gotta be able to walk and talk and chew, and do multiple things, because that's what defines human beings from most other living organisms. The capacity to be able to be multifaceted, and to be nuanced, and to be sensitive. And it is against that backdrop that I ask us then, as ministers of this region and hemisphere, to start to reflect on those things that are critical. When this government came to office, and it is important that I share this perspective with you, because this is not an esoteric discussion. This is real. When we came to office, we were the third most indebted country in the world, officially with a debt to GDP ratio of 158%, but with another 19.6% in arrears. Money that was owed by the government of Barbados that was not paid and not brought to account, bringing our debt to GDP ratio effectively to 177%. Sounds like a lot of arithmetic to ordinary people out there. But what did it mean? That we were coming to work every day and all we could do is pay debt and pay salaries. Everything else that was necessary to be able to move institutions and move programs forward was simply not there. We took a decision, hard as it was, that we had to restructure our debt, but that, as I said to the managing director of the IMF within 1 week of coming to office, that if you're going to ask people to go on a long journey, you need to give them a little breakfast. And to that extent, that was the euphemism. Do not leave out the social protection necessary for our people. Because if we did, we would be having a far greater problem. We can bring back down debt virtually overnight, as we showed. 3 months for our domestic debt, 1 year for our international debt, because they just wanted to be able to benefit from high premium for risk. But when the risk became real, they wanted to run and say, no, they should not be made to take the cuts that they had to cut, having been rewarded for the high risk. But we got past that. But in getting past it, at the same time that we announced what we were doing with respect to debt, we recognized that our public servants had not had pay for a decade, no pay increase for a decade, and immediately a 5% increase was put on the table immediately upon coming into government, in the middle of an IMF program. Immediately, we also reintroduced the commitment that the government of Barbados would continue to once again pay for students to attend the University of the West Indies, even as we entered an IMF program, because we understand that without education, people really, truly cannot sustainably be lifted out of poverty. Families. And that the interaction of that family, once one person has made that step, invariably is that the rest are brought along, both in terms of inspiration, aspiration, and also reality. We then took the decision to start to address issues at the hospital, and while that is a complex issue which we're still addressing, the absence of a new accident and emergency department when built would have meant pandemonium in a pandemic, because we would have been treating people in a space that would have guaranteed the spread of the pandemic in a way that Barbados was able to insulate itself by having taken those early decisions, and then by reinforcing it by taking the old US naval base and within 1 month turning it into a top quality hospital with the help of the European Investment Bank with respect to our ability to protect the whole population by having the treatment of persons at Harrison's Point and not in our sole main general hospital, for those of you who are not aware. And all of those things were done while at the same time having, for the first time in a decade, to buy buses to transport people who were not getting anywhere. And in buying the buses, to buy what is now the largest electronic fleet of buses in the Caribbean, in our commitment to be able to turn the corner with respect to that practice that would lead negatively to the climate that we're trying to protect. And we had to buy garbage trucks. And we had to turn around and then start the difficult task of structural reform, from pension reform right back through to reforming systems that were appropriate to a Victorian era with respect to child protection and child justice. And what Minister Humphrey is now leading and about to complete, changing a welfare system that was born out of a Victorian approach to bring it into a modern Barbados that allows us to be able to recognize that while the state accepts the ultimate responsibility for the vulnerable citizens in our midst, that it is not the state's responsibility alone, because we are family as a population. And if the evidence shows that 1 out of every 5 is below the poverty line, then it means that 4 out of every 5 are above the poverty line. And if 4 out of every 5 are above the poverty line, then together as a people, we can work to wrestle poverty down. We believe that all of these things, while in an IMF program, were possible. But then in 2019, we went further, and the country tends to sometimes forget these things, because I understand, as someone who has been in public life for more than 3 decades, that people are less interested in what you did yesterday and more interested in what you will do for me tomorrow. But we made a decision to put more disposable income in the hands of everybody working in this country. And we did it recognizing that it was important that people, one, could have the opportunity for developing savings, even though the banks continue, Akim, to treat savings as if it was their own, as you correctly said, by giving its clients 0.01% in interest, and by refusing to recognize that the new modality that they have with extracting fees ends up causing the person to feel as though they're relating to a security guard rather than a financial institution. So we increased the savings, and only last night I looked at it again, where the savings in this country has increased by virtually 2/3 in the last 6 years, in spite of going through a pandemic for almost 3 years. And that could only happen if greater disposable income was being left in people's pockets, so that we increase the reverse tax credit. This document speaks about regressive tax systems. This country introduced a reverse tax credit to ensure that those who pay value-added tax, in spite of the fact that we have a basket of goods that are exempted from it, of food and critical items, that they still pay VAT in other areas and services that they benefit, we give them back a reverse tax credit every year. And when we came to office, it was limited to persons earning, I believe, $18,000 and under, and we increased it to $25,000 and under, and we increased the volume of what they get to. Similarly, we expanded, no one pays taxes earning $25,000 and under, and we introduced a new credit called a compensatory income credit, that so long as the government can afford it, it will give you back every cent that you've paid in income taxes if you earn between $25,000 and $35,000 a year. And we have been able to afford it in spite of the pandemic in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. And long may that be the case. But we do it that way in order to let people remember that the burden of carrying the adjustment is all of ours. And we know it because we've walked it. In 5 years, this country has had 2 $1 billion adjustments. For those who want context, 2 adjustments of 10% of GDP in a small state in less than 5 years. So that when we say to you that we have done the heavy lifting and that we are asking for longer and more affordable capital, because it is only fair that we allow the children who will go to school in schools that we build to be able to become adults to help us pay back for that debt, rather than asking us to pay back for the debt when they're still in secondary school by giving us a 15-year loan. If you give us a 30 or 40-year or 50-year loan, then we have the capacity to ensure that the productivity that is necessary to lift our people out of poverty can be achieved because we have trained and developed and have the skill in order so to do. But a world that is driven by 10 and 15-year money will not create the space and opportunities for our people to be lifted out of poverty and to move to the next levels of prosperity that we expect them to do. I share these things because this is where the rubber hits the road. And that is why we ask for the reforms, but we don't do so blind to our own deficiencies. We understand the need for institutional capacity building. And that is why the reforms that Minister Humphrey is taking care of with respect to bringing the Welfare and the Child Care Board and all of the social service agencies is critical. In my first meetings, I asked, well, how many social workers do we have really? And when you check, we had almost 350 across the entire government. But because they were located here and there and everywhere, and were working with different objectives in mind, it meant that the results were equally not as effective as they could be. And one of the things we are therefore doing is recognizing that every social worker must be a first responder and then know who to refer matters to in terms of specializations that are required in terms of the delivery of solutions. And that is where we are going, even in the middle of an IMF program. We recognize that separate from institutional capacity, that we also have to deal with the issue of the very vexatious and difficult problem of mental readiness and cultural behavior. And only in the last 2 weeks, as I addressed the country through my own political convention and got the mandate from them that we need to be able to have a sustained program, if we are successful, to ensure that every citizen readies themselves, particularly coming out of the pandemic, for lifting heavy weight together. And what does that mean? That 5 beacons of excellence have been put forward by us, building on the things that we have that we want to keep. In Barbados, we grew up learning about a share pot mentality. In other words, we take care of each other. You got food today, you share with me. You ain't got food tomorrow, I share with you. The whole question of people working and seeing each other in communities, that's still good. But we need to go further, because what we recognize are that there are some things that are holding us back at the individual level. Voices of accountability, we need to be accountable, and we need to take responsibility for what we say and do. And we need to be able to speak up when we see things wrong, and we need to recognize that we can do things differently, but we must speak up and be accountable. Guardians of cleanliness, why? Because if our environment is clean, it starts a whole process that from our mind to our body to our environment, cleanliness then becomes a standard by which we start to guide ourselves. That we should be agents of respect. We use the word all the time among our respect due. But are we really agents of respect when we disrespect each other? When we turn up, even if when somebody has wronged us and we turn up at a school, do we have to block in order to communicate the message? Do we have to treat each other with disrespect, which then leads invariably to conflict? And it gives us no pleasure that Latin America and the Caribbean occupy virtually every spot in the top 10 countries in the world with the highest per capita homicide rate. There is no formal theater of war in this hemisphere, but the scale of death from crime is unacceptable in almost every corner of the Americas. And it is largely because we have been paying a very heavy price in some countries for Second Amendment rights, in other countries for the right to bear arms. And regrettably, technology has so evolved that those arms, when born, can be disproportionate in its impact, particularly when used in conflict. That we, number 4, if we have a problem and we see it, it's all right to complain, but when you complain, bring a solution. Because at the core of resilience is your capacity to think outside of the box and to recognize that you are part of the solution and not only a victim of the problem. And that requires a cultural mindset, because other than that, people believe that the only entity required to move, particularly in a crisis, is a government. When in truth and in fact, it is the collective will and participation of us all, along with the government, along with the other institutions in the society, that will make the difference. And then finally, that we have particularly now to recognize that we must be global citizens, because our problems are global. And the global problems will only be solved by us coming together and working together. I've taken the time to outline these things because when we finish dealing with the reform of the international financial architecture, and when we recognize that the legislative and the institutional reform that must come will come through cooperation, etc., we will not make the last mile without having equally the empowerment of our people, the emancipation of their minds, and the commitment of them to be part and parcel of that group, that army, that capacity to protect and to still create opportunities. In our context, we are choosing to do it through the embracing of the mission, economy, and missions for development. And the 6 missions that we've chosen for ourselves is that we must first respond to ensure that we protect our environment, our clean environment, green and blue. We are an island, and therefore more ocean is under our jurisdiction than land. We are a small island developing state, but we are a large ocean state. Pick which one you want, but both must be embraced. 2, that if we look in the mirror and we don't like who we see, then we're not going to be able to give of ourselves, give of our best, and not be able to help be part and parcel of the army to build resilience. 3, that we must be able to make sure that people are fed and have access to water, because without food and water, it's just a moot point now. 4thly, that we must ensure that we can make our societies safer and healthier. And if between now and 2030 we can improve those numbers by 50%, we will have done well, recognizing that that is not the destination, but it is simply the point at which we can get further impetus to be able to complete the mission. 5thly, that we must empower and enfranchise our people. We are at danger, particularly given the scale of funds necessary for building resilience, of having to go outside of the countries. And while foreign capital is important, foreign capital must never so decimate the participation of domestic capital such that our citizens become tenants in their own land rather than citizens that have been enfranchised and are capable of forging their own destiny. And finally, the recognition that digitalization is critical. This is not a normal audience. You are development practitioners. And in being development practitioners, it is therefore important to see how all of these things come together with a single objective of being able to lift our people out of poverty, protect those who are already out of poverty, create opportunities for all, and ensure that as we do so, we play our part to lift our weight against the global challenges that face us, and that the need for us to participate in the global public commons. We in this region can do better and can do more. We have done well, but we will never be able to put ourselves to rest until we take all who can be taken out of that trap of poverty. And it is not just the economic poverty that I speak of now, but it is also the spiritual and cultural poverty that matters. And that is why I've also addressed the issue of the beacons of excellence. I hope that as you reflect here, and I noticed the difference between the Bridgetown Declaration and the Bridgetown Initiative, but I know that the spirit that undermines both is the same. And I say simply to you that you could not start this meeting at a better time than the celebration of Diwali, which sends the message of love and light and gives us hope. And it is against that backdrop that this opening takes place today. And as I wish all happy Diwali, I also simply say to us that let us take the time to think outside of the box and to recognize that within our own region, we have unique solutions that have worked to keep our people resilient. Let us take the best of those, but equally not be afraid to modernize the processes and the systems and the attitudes necessary to complete the journey. I hope that by meeting here in Barbados, that it will signal that not just for the purposes of ECLAC or UNDP, that there is cooperation. But Donna, let us see the best from Trinidad working in Barbados. Let us see Dolores, the best from Belize, working in Barbados. And there are other faces across this room that I'm familiar with. Let us ensure that we share with each other, because it is only in sharing best practices that we can perhaps come closer to identifying things that are culturally relevant to our people, but at the same time capable of effectively working. And Manuel, as we do all of this, the measurement of what we do is so important. And in too many of our countries, the systems for measurement are simply not there. In my own country, we are continuing to grapple with the fact that we are not measuring appropriately the informal economy. And while we have done rebasing with respect to those things that we can measure, we have still not found the mechanisms to measure the informal economy sufficiently. I want to suggest that if this can be the threat to democracy, it needs also to be the protector of democracy by being able to allow us to start to measure in real time those things that we couldn't before. And the notion of a 10-year census belongs to an analog world. But the capacity to measure data in real time must be mastered by us all if we are to be effective in deploying scarce resources to vulnerable people. So I wish you all the very best. I thank you for coming to Barbados. Kirk has already told you the wonders of this particular location. There is no possibility of you having to be shipwrecked on the reefs, but I could arrange for you to be detained in Barbados. And it is against that backdrop I simply say that if you chose to, We have come to recognize that Bajans by birth, Bajans by descent, Bajans by choice. And very often, Bajans by choice bring a lot of recent passion. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Motley. Thank you for talking the truth in your own words. We congratulate you and the government of Barbados for its continued commitment to prioritizing social protection, inclusion, and climate justice, and for putting people at the center of the development reform. As we in the Caribbean and Latin America grapple with multiple challenges that transcend borders, it is important that communities not only survive, but thrive after disruptive events. This is the essence of resilience and the essence of our conference and forum in the coming days. Prime Minister, you spoke of share pot in the Bajan culture, and it reminded me of how we in the magnificent continent of Africa always have meals in a circle. There is a reason for that. It is because when you eat in a circle, and these meals are usually including cousins and extended family or neighbors, it means if new guests come, you only shift a little bit backward and you create space for many. And there is an underlying principle in that, which is if one falls, there is a time when others will fall. But if one falls and the circle, with its momentum, pull them back, we remain united and we all remain fed and in good condition. I think with that in mind, I ask all of us to be willing to shift slightly in how we think, shift slightly in our policy making, shift slightly in how we allocate finances so that others who are in poverty can join the circle, so that others that are marginalized can join the circle. You will be surprised if each of us shifts only slightly. It will not be thousands, it will be millions that we bring to our circle, and we can share the resources of this beautiful planet, which are abundant actually, and plenty of it just goes to waste. I thank you. I thank all the distinguished speakers. I thank all of the ministers that made their way to be here for this important conversation. I do ask that we come with innovation and come with an open mind to find new solutions and look for new innovative, digitalized ways of moving forward. I cannot end without thanking the government of Barbados, the Prime Minister, the Minister, but also the team behind the Minister in the Ministry of People Empowerment and in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and my team in UNDP here at the MCO, but also at the regional level. I thank you all and wish you a fantastic forum, and we hope that we come out with something and an action plan and a declaration that will help us move forward. I do ask the speakers to remain where they are, and I will hand over to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Limia, and thank you to all the distinguished speakers and Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley for their insightful and thoughtful remarks. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage His Excellency, Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Carter, affectionately known in Barbados as the Mighty Gabby. We're making just a slight adjustment to our stage design to accommodate the Mighty Gabby. He's a cultural ambassador of Barbados, legendary calypsonian, folk musician, and social activist. He is known for his sharp wit and his satirical lyrics, but he is through that medium able to bring to our consciousness the critical social issues that affect not only us here in Barbados, but in the region and across the world. Today he's singing two of my favorites, Emerton, which is a song of exile, and I'll give you a little background to Emerton. Emerton was a small village within Bridgetown, and the government was moving those city dwellers to another space in order to build a sewage plant. And Gabby crafted the most amazing song called Emerton. And wherever you are in the world, Emerton applies to you, to being moved from what you consider your home to being exiled to somewhere else. He's also singing another classic, Bridgetown, which is a tribute to the artisans and the vendors who occupy the Bridgetown space early on a Saturday morning. Listen to the lyrics of this song, and wherever you are from in this region, you know these people, and in some instances, you are these people. And to show you how versatile he is, he just leaned over to me and said, I've just written something as I'm sitting here for Latin America and the Caribbean. Tell me he is not an amazing artist. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for His Excellency Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Carter, the mighty Gabby.
Thank you very much. I just want to say it's a real pleasure to be here this morning. And as Joe said, I'm going to start with what I just wrote. Latin America, and the Caribbean, we working together. Latin America, and the Caribbean, we moving together. No, I want to see how good you all are. Sing with me. I can sing it a little slower so we get it together, okay? Let's go. Say, Latin America, and the Caribbean, we working together. Everybody. Latin America, and the Caribbean, we working together. Latin America, and the Caribbean, we moving together. Thank you. Bridgetown early, Saturday morning, see the women, how they calling, singing, come for your breadfruit, come for the corn, come for the apples, fresh as the morn, come for banana, come for potato, come for the guava, 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 guava. Saturday morning, you see the children, how they're smiling, singing, don't be no fool, don't play too cute, fill up your belly with lovely fresh fruit, come for the breadfruit, come for the corn, come for the apples, fresh as the morn, come for banana, come for potato, come for the guava, the guava, the guava, the guava. Bridgetown, early Saturday morning, oh morning. La la ine, la 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 ine, la 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 ine, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, bye bye banana ine, la 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 le le le, ay 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 ay, gala 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 gala. Rich dog early, Saturday morning. Rich dog early, Saturday morning. Rich dog early, Saturday morning. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say this quickly. I thought I saw my friend Jerry Walcott somewhere here. Jerry, put your hand up. Right there. I want you to know that it was his grandmother that encouraged me to get into music. Not Jerry. Jerry cannot sing. Jerry is my dear, lifelong friend. When I told next door, if I push up my hand like that, I used to touch Jerry's house. That's how next door it was. And his grandmother is the one that taught me, to take me on, and put me to sit down. But I had to always report. My mother would tell Miss Walcott if I behaved good the past few days, and then I would get the chance to listen to the thing named Jerry, the thing, the record going around. The RCA and Victor or something or yada. Anyhow, there's a thing, you wind up with your hand and thing, and then she used to put on a big white cloth over it afterwards and tell me, I'll see you next week. So, you know, I have to thank Jerry's grandmother, Miss Walcott, for encouraging me into music. And she's my first teacher. So thanks, Jerry. And Jerry, thanks for not interrupting when we were doing our thing at that time. And this is a song from our area. You tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right there, so all right, I say I shall go. You tell me to forget, it is there I want my own children to grow. All right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I would never, never, never forgive you, because look what you do to my Emerton. You tell me to forget that you bring bulldozers and push down the houses, so all right, I say I shall go. Oh, you tell me to forget. You bring bulldozers and push down the houses. Oh, all right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I will never, 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 never forgive you, because look what you do to my Emerton. Oh, you tell me to forget that you uproot my people and scatter them to and fro. All right, I say I shall go. Oh, you tell me to forget that you did the wrong things and didn't let my children know. All right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I will never, 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 never forgive you, because look what you do to my Emerton. Oh, you tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right there, so all right, I say I shall go. All right, I say I shall go. All right, I say I shall go, 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 I shall go. I say I shall go. Thank you very much. Thank you. I am the luckiest guy in the world. I have either worked or visited 23 Latin countries. I am so grateful for the opportunity. But I also have to mention that the first song I ever wrote in my life was a song called Vote for Motley and Get Free Cakey. And it was for my dear friend, Prime Minister Mia Motley's grandfather. Thank you all very much.
His Excellency Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Carter, the mighty Gabby, a cultural ambassador of Barbados. Wasn't that an amazing performance, ladies and gentlemen? Please, another round of applause for the mighty Gabby. And as you listen to him, did you not see yourself reflected in the lyrics of those songs? His timeless repertoire, it not only entertains, it also educates, providing incisive commentary on contemporary society, not only in Barbados, but the wider Caribbean. And his masterpiece, Emerton, as I told you earlier, is a song of exile that resonates with displaced people around the globe. As we conclude this opening ceremony, we invite everyone to join us for a coffee break in the foyer for approximately 15 minutes. It's a perfect opportunity to connect, reflect, and recharge. You can get some photographs with Gabby. And we will see you back here in 15 minutes for the inspiring panel discussion on culture as a tool for development in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the mighty Gabby will also join us for that panel discussion. Let's keep it tight, ladies and gentlemen. 15 minutes.
Testing 1, 2.
Testing.
Yeah, still on 2. Hey, hey. Yeah, 1, 2. Hey, hey. Yeah, 2.
Ready? Ladies and gentlemen, please come back to Salon A, B, and C. We want to get ready to start the panel discussion on using culture as a tool for development in Latin America and the Caribbean. So please, 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 let's get started. Please come back to the salon. Let's get started. We're getting ready to start in 5 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. We're getting ready to start. Our apologies for the delays, but you know how these things go. You start with one bilateral, and they run a little longer than we anticipated. I want to get us started on our panel discussion on culture as a tool for development in Latin America and the Caribbean. So let me introduce you to our panelists. I'll ask them to come on the stage. We start with a favorite of mine, Varia Williams. She's a creative arts psychotherapist therapist. She's an activist, an actress, and a drama teacher from Barbados, and she works with children and the youth using drama and theater techniques to address social concerns. Locally, regionally, and internationally, Varia has consulted with a number of development institutions on issues related to human rights, gender, youth, violence, sexual and reproductive rights, coordinating and conducting workshops in Barbados, Belize, Fiji, and Namibia. Ladies and gentlemen, Varia Williams. You heard him perform a little while ago, but I will still introduce you to him as Anthony Carter, better known as the Mighty Gabby. He is an 8-time Calypso King, folk singer, actor, activist, and cultural icon. He's made a profound impact through his work, passion, and dedication to cultural development. He has consistently used his gifts to uplift those who might otherwise go unheard. In recognition of his significant contributions, he's been named a cultural ambassador of Barbados, and I'm going to add this in. He's been teaching at St. Leonard's Boys School and has formed the 100 Voice Boys Choir. If you don't get a chance to hear them, Google them or go on YouTube. They are phenomenal. Ladies and gentlemen, Anthony Carter. Fabiola Mendez is a Puerto Rican cuatro player, singer, educator, and Emmy-nominated composer, focused on the exploration of culture and identity through storytelling. Her music is a blend of folk, Afro-Caribbean, and jazz, showcasing the cuatro, a 10-string traditional guitar out of Puerto Rico. She's recognized as the Latin Artist of the Year by the Boston Music Awards. Fabiola and her band, they've performed on national stages, including the NPR Tiny Desk concerts, and they were amazing during COVID, so go check her out. And the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and the Hatch Memorial Shell in Boston, Santurce Fine Arts Center, among many others. Ladies and gentlemen, Fabiola Mendez. Lloyd Gallimore is from Panama and is a longtime keyboardist and director of The Beachers, a legendary Caribbean music group that he co-founded in 1967. For over 50 years, Lloyd has led The Beachers, blending their original Antillean song, which is rooted in calypso, reggae, and mento, with modern arrangements and technology. Ladies and gentlemen, Lloyd Gallimore. And she's in the process of saying goodbye to our Prime Minister and wrapping up a bilateral, so bear with us. But our moderator is Ms. Michelle Muchette. She is the UNDP's Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, and she'll be moderating the discussion. It promises to be inspiring and illuminating, so please feel free to get involved in the conversation. These conversations about culture as a tool for development need to go much further, and culture as a tool for development needs its own forum right here in Barbados. Everybody agree with me? There you go. So ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Michelle Mouchette. And you see how important this woman is? There's somebody keeping her seat warm until she arrives. She is going to be with us in a couple of minutes, please. Ah, she's here. Yes, there you go. On cue, ladies and gentlemen, Michelle Mouchette.
Thank you for waiting. I must confess that we were engaging in a very meaningful conversation with Prime Minister Motley that just reinforced the importance of the conversation we are about to start here. This is probably a bit unusual in a ministerial forum, having a panel with artists and creators and engaging with them, but it has several reasons behind it. The first is we are here to reimagine development in our region, to deconstruct some of the constructs that we have been advancing in the past years and recreate. And here, in this stage, we have people that every day build and rebuild, construct, deconstruct, that tell our own story in a very particular way that we might not find with that level of clarity in textbooks or in policy analysis or in other documents. We find in them also the possibility of recognizing ourselves, recognizing how are we part of the same, and you start with that, Gabi, in your intervention. As Latin America and the Caribbean, we are the same, but we are different, and there's a beauty in that. And you do that with the different genders and styles in which you work and combine. But it also has the purpose of helping us regain trust in our capacity, in our uniqueness, and the creative capacity that we have as a region. Latin America and the Caribbean is the birthplace of unique genders in the different artistic disciplines. We are the birthplace of the steel band. We are the birthplace of the calypso, salsa, bolero, tango. Things are very unique to us and that we can appreciate separately, but we can appreciate combining them depending on what we want to achieve. We are also the birthplace of the bachata. We are the birthplace of the realismo mágico. And I say that in Spanish because I think that's one of the most beautiful literary examples that we can have. We're the birthplace of the crónica. So we have a capacity to innovate, to create, to reinvent ourselves. And we need some of that in the policy, political, and development arena nowadays, in which, as Prime Minister Motley said, we can't continue doing exactly the same that we have been doing. And there are a lot of good things that we have achieved in the past years. So this is not an idea of starting from scratch, but we need to deconstruct ourselves somehow to start rebuilding ourselves. And as Regional Director of UNDP for Latin America and the Caribbean, you might have realized very quickly that for me, it's impossible to position a region in the global landscape only thinking about where our challenges and fallacies and risks and weaknesses are. My work is to position our region from their strengths, from the capacity, from its uniqueness, from its richness, from its culture, from its strength, and from there, use those strengths, those capacities, to find solutions to our challenges. And this is the idea of this panel today, to see how what you do every day, through culture, through creations, through arts, through connecting with people, and through what you produce and you do, we can learn from you on how can we extrapolate that to the development arena, to the policy arena, to politics in times in which the world is more polarized than ever after. How do we find a common language? How do we revisit our storytelling as a region? How do we go beyond the language barriers and we speak a common language that identify ourselves and that allow us to cooperate, preserving and respecting the differences that we have that are part also of our identity. And for this, I would like to start with you, Gabi, if you allow me to refer to you, to Gabi. You are a cultural ambassador, and the Prime Minister, Mia Motley, at some point referred to you as a national treasure. I think we all had the privilege to realize why was that. And I would like to invite you to share with us some reflections on how culture, how music can help us build a nation, how can help us to come together around a shared identity, and how can we extrapolate that not just to our national identities, but to our regional identity as Latin America and the Caribbean. Gabi, what a privilege.
Thank you, my dear sister. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who stayed to hear this panel discussion. Firstly, we must remember that culture is not just about dancing and singing and writing and so on. Culture is us, the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we educate ourselves, the way we live, the way we die, the way we marry. That is culture, and so much more.
And I have always said that in every single country, and in particular Latin America and the Caribbean, that if we had a ministry to be named, and we had two names, and those two names were culture and education, that we should call it exactly that, the Ministry of Culture and Education. Whereas on many occasions you find that they would name it the Ministry of Education and Culture, when in fact education is but part of culture. So once we establish that, then we can go ahead and understand what is culture to us. As my dear sister said, we have created so many rhythms, so many beats, that it's amazing. In fact, there's no area in this world that would have created more rhythms, more beats, more original music than Latin America and the Caribbean. My sister talked about salsa, merengue, and so on, calypso. Reggae is also part of it. And we could go on and on and on. And we could go into Cuba, because Cuba has created, I would say, the most. And all the other Latin countries have joined in and put their own stamp and their own originality and their own creativity to these different rhythms and so on that we have. These rhythms move our people. They make them dance, they make them cry, they make them reminisce, they make them look forward to the future. And at our weddings and our parties and other gatherings and so on, we play these rhythms. And we don't just play it for ourselves, we play it for the whole world. And in fact, there are so many occasions we can point to other people who do hybrids of what we created for their own culture, for their own benefit. But collectively, we are yet to cash in on what belongs to us, because the rest of the world have copied it, they played it, they have lionized it, never to our own benefit. So it's about time that we get together as a region and see how best we can go about as a collective entity to make sure that we get maximum return for what we have given the world. Because it is not fair to us that other people, you see it in movies, you see it in plays, Broadway, you go up to London and so on, you see it. But is there any time that it is mentioned that it came from Venezuela, or that it came from Costa Rica, or that it came from Mexico, or it came from Cuba, or it came from Jamaica? The answer is no. And it's about time that we insist that they put the stamp and say, from Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you.
Gracias, Gaby, for sharing those reflections. Now, I would like to continuar la conversación contigo, Fabiola. En tu trabajo, trabajo es difícil resumirlo en pocas palabras, pero algo que es muy característico es cómo logras mezclar, unir diferentes géneros, afrocaribeños, folclore, jazz, que son maravillosos y extraordinarios en sí mismos, pero cuando puestos juntos también pueden lograr un nivel de belleza, de innovación tremendamente particular.
That is very unique. Jazz in particular is precisely one of these genres, musical genres that is very difficult to know its origins, where each interpreter gives it their touch, improvises and plays, and they use it as a tool for diplomacy. I'd like to ask you to share with us in this meeting where we are thinking about how to develop our democracies and strengthen our democracies. What can you tell us about this creative process? What can we learn from this capacity and necessity to be flexible and to be able to adjust and have our own style and appreciate the strength that we have behind us and that joins us in this process of finding solutions in our region.
Saludos a todos y a todas. Muy honrada de estar aquí como representación de Puerto Rico. Como bien mencionó acá nuestro compañero.
As you had mentioned, was mentioned by Gabby, the culture is what happens daily. We are culture. From the corner where I live, the music from the mountains, my focus is to celebrate the folklore, and I compare that folklore is the culture, how we reflect our realities, and through that empowering us. And I understand that my history has a lot of similarities with your history and the history of each one of us. When I am in the creative process, I am Puerto Rican who reside in the United States, but my reality reflects a lot all of these genres and all, from all these words of the cultures that are in the United States. As a Puerto Rican quarter player with the favor of the mountain, it's important to see how I can connect with these everything in my surroundings. How do I incorporate these rhythms of the Afro-Caribbean inheritance, which is also important, as my colleague mentioned. For me, the wealth of the Latin America and the Caribbean is that we have so many influences of what is coming from Africa, with all the genres and all the music. The inhabitants of these territories mixed with the indigenous people and the European influence, which come from the colonial times. All of that is so rich that one says, how can we continue this musical creation process? Music and art is, as we said, it is in constant movement, and sometimes one finds it a lot of challenges when we are talking about traditions and general genre and musical genres. But human beings sometimes want to put definition to everything, and we want to box everything, and it is important that we define and have terms so we can understand ourselves. But in the end of it, for me, music is representing all this wealth of what each one has to contribute, and that is what I try to reflect. I come from Puerto Rico, from the mountains, but also I reside in the United States. But I also have my surroundings of people from different cultures. When I listen to them, this is like, oh my God, I enjoy what these people are doing. How can I incorporate a little bit of that song in my music, for example? It is I don't know what to say. It's like a reflection of who I am, and I think that each one of us, in our spaces, if we apply the same rule, just to say who I am, and how all this forms a beautiful space for us as human beings, I think the world will be a better place. Thank you. Thank you very much, Fabiola. As she says, culture is in constant movement. One of the challenges, but also of the beauties of those of us who work in the developing world. The developing world is in constant movement, and it represents the need to review and reinvent. But also, just like you are artists from our region, born and bred in this area, and you have the capacity to do it. I think that there's no difference between artists, politicians, ministries, authorities. We come from the same region from that same wealth, and we have that same capacity, creative capacity to reinvent, and we apply it through different means. You do it through music, and first, for us, we have to do it through public policies, but there's a similarity which is important, and then which is the cultural dimension, and it has to be contemplated when we think about how we design our development models in our countries. Daria?
You are an artist, but you are also a psychotherapist and a drama teacher. And I must confess, if someone who would have told me when I was deciding what to do with my life that this was possible, I might be seated on that chair instead of here. But it's so wonderful to have you here, because if you listen to the interventions that we had in the inauguration of this forum, from the Prime Minister, from Jose Manuel, from ECLAC, myself, and all the interventions that we listened to, it's very clear that our societies are living under enormous levels of uncertainty, pressure, anxiety, insecurity. Prime Minister Motley just referred to a society that is somehow living under a post-traumatic effect, probably as a consequence of the pandemic, that tends to emerge, not immediately after the shock, but afterwards. And one of the challenges that we policymakers have today is that these kind of crises, be it climate-related, health-related, and any other nature of crisis, are emerging, are complex, are compounded, and are going to be somehow part of our normality in the coming years. So how your experience can help us navigate the main purpose of this forum, that is, how can we develop social protection systems that are more resilient? How do we contribute? And at the center of the social protection system, and these big words, is the human being. It's a person with fears, with dreams, and with a very dramatic loss of sense of agency that is at the core of the concept of human development. So you work with people. You work with people and you use art to build resilience in human beings. Tell us a bit of that, because I think listening to you could be very useful for us when we sit together and think about how we translate that personal experience at the individual level to policies and frameworks that can allow us to facilitate that for our societies and our region in a bigger way. Varia.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction and the question. Did you all hear the question? It was multi-layered. It was a lot of different things, from policy to where I am and what I do. So maybe I'll start there. I'm a creative arts psychotherapist, and most people do not know what that is. And so, having come back to Barbados from the UK with this qualification, I find I'm explaining it and selling it even. So it's a form of psychotherapy, and we use the arts in all of its modalities, in music and dance and movement and fine art and drawing and poetry and creative writing and storytelling. We are very client-centered and we meet the client where they're at. But what we are trying to do is use the arts to address whatever is in the room, which is sometimes about healing, sometimes it is about wholeness and balance. So what I find I see most in the room is something more to do with identity and belonging and freedom of expression, to be who you are and to express what you want. That's what I see in the room most often. We work with individuals and we work with groups. And so you've asked some really large questions that I'm thinking about in terms of not just what happens in the room, but on a much broader scale. And I want to say that we in this region, especially the Caribbean, we are still reeling from the aftermath of the transatlantic slave trade. We are still reeling from colonialism. We are still reeling from the pandemic. And in between all of that are natural disasters, hurricanes and earthquakes and volcanoes. This is a lot to deal with intergenerationally, and people wake and live and see. And when I have someone in the room, an adult or a child, they're carrying something that didn't belong to them at first, that was way before that. And so how do we address that? And how do we address that through arts? What we do is allow the space for expression of feeling. And when Gabby came here and he sang Emerson, and you saw the look on his face. I have not listened to that song without crying when I allow myself to experience what he is in fact singing about displacement, about fear, about anger. All right, I say I will go. You tell me to forget are the words of that song. And so much of what we have inherited has been about suppression and repression and oppression, to tell us to forget and keep it moving and act and smile and be the Caribbean and Latin American people who smile and dance. And yes, we are, and therein lies our resilience through our many cultural forms. So I go back to that when we're looking for joy. Through carnivals and experiences of festivals and what we have here called crop over. Experience that to the fullest, because we are resilient and we are still here and we can still move and we can sing and we can dance. And that's what we do in the room, to remember to come back into the body and remember who we are and hold a mirror up to ourselves and say, this is who we are. But we can't always be joy, 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 right? Allow ourselves to feel deeply, to feel what Emerson is singing about. And so that's part of the work. Putting a mirror up to ourselves. And when we talk about culture, everything about our culture is not beautiful. And so we must create spaces for reflection to see what can we do and who are we? It's not always pretty. There are parts of our culture that speak to the way that which we see gender that needs revisiting and needs reflection. And that's just one example. Prime Minister Motley spoke of the underbelly of poverty. Allowing people to see who they are and recognize that they are people still, through the art forms, through movement, through poetry, but creating spaces for expression. So you've asked me some very difficult questions on a culture, on a policy level, creating spaces for reflection, creating spaces for pauses and breath and understanding of who we are and allowing ourselves to feel it deeply. It is, if I ask everybody in this room to get up and sigh and ask you how you are and say, express that through your body, we would be having a different meeting, but a meeting, I suppose, that leaves you thinking and feeling. So that's it.
Thank you, Varia. This is extraordinary because it's embracing who we are in the bright side and the dark side, and this applies for us as individuals, for us as communities, as societies, and as a region itself, but it also applies for us as decision makers. It's not only what decision makers need to know in order to craft policies and make decisions vis-a-vis the future of development in our region, but also to acknowledge that we, each of us here, are part of that. We're part of that story. And we need to recognize ourselves as part of that without fearing, because there is where we connect with the rest of the society, the rest of our communities, the rest of our countries, and hopefully the rest of our region. So I think it's a very deep reflection, and perhaps we need some more time to breathe, to connect, and to recognize ourselves as individuals and ourselves as a collective that can push forward transformation, but for that we need to know who we are. And that's fundamental for us to advance our missions, our work. This room is full of courageous people, accepting the challenge of leading today and trying to make decisions to solve the challenges that we have requires courage. But at the same time, we need to be aware of this, because all the decisions that we're making goes to impact the lives of people with these complexities from within. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Lloyd, you are, y no sé si seguir en español o en inglés, porque eres precisamente un reflejo de lo que es ser América Latina y Caribe en un solo cuerpo. Tú vienes de Bocas del Toro, de Panamá, de una comunidad eminentemente caribeña, no solo porque está en el Caribe.
Eminently Caribbean, not only Caribbean, but culturally you have preserved those traditions, and you have, of course, been a reference of that identity, Caribbean identity, in the Caribbean and in Latin America also. And in those two contrasts and that the uniqueness that we have, you have been an important protagonist in the instruction of social cohesions at different levels in preserving identity and creating cohesion, and when we extrapolate it from the you and through your music the public has been converted. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how music that has permitted to be a vehicle to create this social cohesion, how necessary it is, and a cohesion which preserves the differences, but it brings the people together at the same time. Hello, thank you, Michelle. My name says it all. Lloyd George Gallimore Goff. Mis padres, por el lado de mi padre, eran de Jamaica, y mis padres.
We're from Martinique, so I have a mixture. Okay, but I'm going to go in Spanish. He sido una persona que desde joven he siempre tratado de.
I've tried to look towards an object, a fixed object. When I left my secondary school, I returned to the capital city towards Boca de Toro, which was basically a plantation, a banana plantation of the United Fruit Company, a later named Chilkill and Company. And I found myself in a situation where I studied music since as a child. I studied piano with private teachers at the National Conservatory, but it was not my main objective, but it was always in my heart. It was in my blood, okay? I returned to Boca de Toro after graduating from secondary school. And I was employed at an office where I was next to the executive, the president of the company, which was American. And I found myself in a situation that there were three cultures in Boca de Toro: the American on one side, the local one, which was the Afro-Caribbean and the Antillians, and the third group was the Latins from the Panama region. And when one of those happenstances, there was a night activity which involved dancing from a group from a church, and there wasn't any orchestra, and they called me. Well, you play the piano, create a group, and let's make music, and so we can have a pleasant night. And that is how. And I noted that we were segregated. The Americans on one side, the black person on one side, and the Latin on the other side. And I said, this can't be. I said to myself, this can't be. So I proposed to join those three groups through music. And I invented what today is the group called the Los Teachers, which we have since 1966, for example. We are now 50-something years old now, since the beginning of the group. The next activity, the following activity, which was done, was in the open air, and for the first time, I am almost sure that we were able to bring the three ethnic groups to come together in one space in the open air, and they're shared. And for me, that was a great satisfaction to see an American mixed with a black person and somebody from the Latin colony, and then we had a real ball that night. And for me, that was so satisfactory to see them in an open, totally open space. And but what am I getting at? What's my point? That motivated me to continue strengthening the group to such an extent that we started to win over all those persons that were in that mini province. It was one of the least populated populations because we are also isolated. There wasn't any streets that connected us to the rest of the country. We either had to go by boat or by plane to the other parts. So and that's where the English came. We started to develop that product which we call Beachers, and we, in a space of 1.5 years, we were able to consolidate this union. So beautiful to see how we shared all these three cultures in one which nowadays is normal for it now. You see me, I was married to a Latin, I got married to a Latin person. My brother met a person who was from Cuba. He got married, he got to her, etc., etc., to give a few practical examples. And thank God that province has taken on a united sense of development. And I am so satisfied. I'm so happy that when I return to my country and I see so many mixtures of culture, sometimes I just break out in tears to see it all. You also make us put us in tears. You must be very proud when you return to know that somehow, with the power of the music and the creative capacity, you've been able to contribute to that become a reality. That's a public policy, not just taking decision, but you can create ability to connect the community. That's very powerful. I want to thank you all for this opportunity, your excellencies, the distinguished delegates. I hope that you were able to, just like me, not only to listen from the intellectual point of view, the wealth that we have here, which we have to deepen even more. I hope that you've heard them from the heart, who you are, what is our origin, what it is that we have in common, and this makes us unique. And I hope that this helps us to navigate through this day and the discussions that we have, and which will be very intense. And we must find solutions under pressure where the region finds itself now. I hope that we can do it with a little bit of music, with a little bit of creativity, with a little bit of pride with regard to what we are. And what is beautiful or what is not beautiful is our reality, and it is on that based on that reality that we are navigating. And we have a region that is extraordinarily rich and powerful, and on the which we work. This is, as Varia says, this is not a question of taking decision making by party makers. This is a work that we have to do with people understanding that those particularities and how this social protection system that we must design. We hope that this can help us to confront not only as individuals but collectively the different shocks that we are going to be experiencing in the next years. I thank you all with my heart. For me, as a director, regional director of the UNDP, to coordinate this event, this discussion, which was put us in a different level and another place to connect us from there. And I hope that the results, and all the results will result in benefits for our dear Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much to all.
Phone call. I'll make a phone call. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Michelle Mouchette. She is the Regional Director of UNDP. Thank you so much. That session was extremely insightful. For me, as a member of the creative community, I wish that we could have an entire forum dedicated simply to the work of creatives and how we can take this movement forward using culture and the arts as tools for development in Latin America and the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a warm round of applause. Now, I just wanted to let you know that we are running behind. It's been a busy morning. We're running behind, and we're trying to catch up. So our next session, which is thematic table 1, it focuses on adaptive social protection systems for vulnerable populations. The moderator is Rita Ciara. She's the Inclusive Growth Team Leader with UNDP LAC. And we're also going to have on that opening panel the Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs here in Barbados, Minister Kirk Humphrey. Also the Minister of Social Development and Assistance, Family Affairs, and the Fight Against Hunger from Brazil, Wellington Diaz. And the Vice President for Gender Equality in the Caribbean, Parla Americas, Lisa Jauher. and the Minister of Social Development of Chile, Javier Toro. Now we're going to break up this session because, as I said, we're running behind and we're trying to get back to where we want to be. So we're going to start this session and run from 1 o'clock to 1:30. So what we're starting with is the opening panel. The ministers will make their remarks. We're going to break for lunch from 2:30 to 3:30, and then we'll come back with the other members of that panel giving their comments and their observations and asking questions as well. So this thematic table 1, adaptive social protection systems for vulnerable populations, will be in 2 phases. It is going to run from, we're going to break at 1:30, at 2:30, sorry, my apologies. We're going to break at 2:30 for lunch. Okay, say that again. We're going to break for lunch from 1:30 to 2:30. And then we're going to continue with the ministerial remarks and the other reflections and observations with the ministers when we come back. Now, we want to keep the lunch hour tight to 1 hour because we want to get back on track to where we wanted to be in our agenda. And we want the thematic table number 2, which is the 6th meeting of the presiding officers of the Regional Conference on Social Development of LAC, to start at 3:30 sharp. So let us call the members of this panel to the table. Minister Kirk Humphrey, Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, Barbados. Minister Humphrey. Also, Wellington Diaz, Minister of Social Development and Assistance, Family Affairs and the Fight Against Hunger, from Brazil. I'm telling you, Gabby is a global citizen. Every minister who's passed here has hugged Gabby before they went to the stage. Vice President for Gender Equality in the Caribbean, Parla Americas, Lisa Javier. She's hugging up Gabby too. I'm telling you, he's a global citizen. And the Minister of Social Development of Chile, Javier Toro. I now invite the moderator, Rita Chiara, Inclusive Growth Team Leader, and she's hugging Gabby as well for UNDP LAC. Okay, the trick is to move Gabby from the entrance to the stage. Yeah, move Gabby. There you go. Thank you very much, the mighty Gabby. So we're now about to start this session, ladies and gentlemen. Thematic Table 1, Adaptive Social Protection Systems for Vulnerable Populations. Rita, I hand over to you.
Gracias. ¿Me escuchan? Es un placer inmenso para mí estar aquí
For me to be
hoy.
here today. I have spent more than 10 years in an island which I love a lot, an island shared by 2 countries, the Dominican Republic and Haiti, working also on the reduction of poverty on the side of both governments. And here, for each hurricane, I had a tropical storm, and for every drought, all the people, the most vulnerable people that we had to protect, they felt that we were back to square one, that anyone can start over again. And this has increased. We have seen how frequently it has increased. And every time it increased, all the efforts that we have done for these persons who have come out of poverty return to poverty. And we have started to reflect profoundly on that the traditional system of social protections have to be a step again. And I remember very emotionally when the DR government, we put a survey on the homes, but in the first step, which has to be a reflection on the new systems of protection, social protection, which we call social protection systems adaptive, where we have to take into consideration the climate change and the reduction of risks. And that is why I have a great pleasure to be here with these 4 other panelists to speak on this topic.
This table number 1 into session. We're going to have half an hour to discuss with the 4 panelists, and then after the lunch, we're going to have a discussion with all the other ministers who would like to share with us their experience from their countries. I have the pleasure to have here with me Mr. Humphrey, who serves as Minister of People, Empowerment and Elder Affairs of Barbados, has been at the forefront of social protection policy in Barbados, focusing on inclusive and resilient social system. His ministry leads efforts to ensure that social programs are adaptive to changing needs and vulnerable populations in Barbados. Thank you so much, Minister. Mrs. Javier Toro Cáceres, Minister of Social Development and Family of Chile. She was appointed by the President of the Republic, Gabriel Boric, as the authority in charge of reconstruction efforts following climate events, a role she continues holding. She became one